All right, our last speaker today is Susan Carey, and she's going to talk to us about the ontogenetic origin of abstract combinatorial thought.
So I want to echo other people's thank you for inviting me to this conference. I've really, really enjoyed it. I'm going to impose upon you not the fruits of a very long research program where I really understand how everything is coming out, but rather the beginnings of a research program, so bear with me. But here's the problem. The human conceptual repertoire is a totally unique phenomenon on Earth. We're the only animals who can ponder the causes and cures of global warming, of pancreatic cancer, can reason about orders of infinity. In fact, we're the only animals that can think thoughts formulated in terms of the concepts that are lexicalized by most of the 500,000 words in English. And these are not words just for actions, objects, properties, right? I mean, this conceptual repertoire is astonishing in its variety. Babies can't think thoughts in terms of most of those concepts either. So how does this conceptual repertoire arise? That's a really unsolved problem in cognitive science and also in the history of analytic philosophy. It's seen to be a central one. Now, as a matter of logic, this isn't the controversial claim. The form of the answer has to be a specification of the innate representational primitives that are the input to whatever learning mechanisms, and a characterization of the learning mechanisms that get you from here to there. That's just a matter of logic. But that leaves open all kinds of possibilities about what that initial structure and what those learning mechanisms are like. So this talk concerns the innate primitives, not the later conceptual development. And what we know from the last 35 or 40 years in developmental cognitive science is that there are at least two kinds of very representationally rich, computationally complicated, innate, evolutionarily ancient primitives, namely sensory motor and even perceptual representations like depth perception and things like that. Those mechanisms are innate. But also systems of core cognition, which have rich conceptual role, but are otherwise quite perception-like. So examples, I'm not going to go through this literature, representations of objects and actually of the physical world. That's where the physical knowledge needed for the paper we just heard came from. Representations of agents, causal, intentional, communicative agents, representations of number, a variety, representations of the social world. But the existence of these two classes of primitives, I think, which are innate primitives, are very well documented. It doesn't preclude there being other ones, right? But these are the only ones we've looked for. And so what I took on, for reasons I won't tell you, was about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, the question of whether, in addition, part of the animal representational computational machinery, or could be different answers for babies, include non-linguistic representations that are a language-like language of thought. And by that I mean they have a language-like, logic-like format, namely arbitrary unitary symbols, and they participate in profligate combinatorial productivity. They have propositional content, they bear truth value, and they support deductive inferences. So the question is, do non-linguistic creatures have a Fodorian language of thought? Now, philosophers have debated this explicitly, at least since Descartes. And Fodor answered, obviously, yes, they must. What allows the central conceptual role? What allows the output from one module to talk to and interact with the output from another module? And also, how do you explain the flexibility and productivity of animal behavior? But also, with respect to human babies in general, we clearly have such a representational system because we have language, right? And language has these properties. But Fodor asks, how could language be learned if the mental representations that underlie the meaning of language weren't available for the hypotheses about how the language works? So that's supposed to be a priori arguments that just settle the issue. This is going to be widely found in the animal kingdom. But other philosophers have argued obviously no. Descartes, who raised this question in this modern form, argued obviously no. And Donald Davidson, a major analytic philosopher, also has an extended argument. I want to point out that there's two versions of an answer to Fodor's question of how it's possible to learn while still making it plausible that pre-linguistic babies don't have this yet. So one is that this kind of thought arises in hominid evolution with language, and in ontogenesis only upon learning a language. That is, the innate support of it is part of the language acquisition mechanism. There's going to be innate support for it for sure, and babies have to have the machinery available to eventually learn it. That's not at debate here. Another possibility is it's present in non-linguistic creatures, but it's implicit. It's carried by the computation that explicit symbols enter into, and when you learn language, you somehow learn a vocabulary of explicit symbols that do this work. So some more throat clearing. I'm adopting here a representational computational theory of mind. I think it's the dominant paradigm in cognitive science. And if you adopt that view, you are committed to the existence of mental symbols. This isn't a metaphor, this is dead literal. And you are committed to these theoretical entities because these are the inputs to further computations and the outputs of computations, which are the input to further computations. There's no computation without representation. And you are committed to their being an answer to what those symbols are like. What's their format? Are they iconic? Are they analog? Do they have some other format? How does that format support the inferential role? And what is the inferential role? And what gives those symbols the meaning they have, right? That is, their representations. What makes them the representations there are? There must be answers to that question, and we have to, in principle, be able to make progress on answering them. And in fact, we have many examples where we've done so. So again, if you don't know this work, this won't mean anything to you. But once you find some evidence for some representational content in the mind of an animal or a baby or a human adult, for that matter, you go to work to ask, what is that representational system like? So there's lots of evidence for numerical content. That's a very abstract property of the world. And it turns out there's at least two systems of representation that have numerical content. One is the analog number system. This is Dehaen's number sense, in which number is represented, cardinal values are represented by actual symbols that are analog functions of the cardinal value of the set. So there's length, an external analog representation, and the signature of this kind of system. It's a very common coding scheme for all kinds, for brightness, loudness, dimensions of experience, but there's it's defined over, the system is used to represent number as well. The signature is that the discriminability between cardinal values is a strict function of ratio. These representations respect Weber's law, scalar variability. But there's another one, which is a system of parallel individuation, where the signature limit is an absolute set size signature. It's totally insensitive to ratio. And this system works entirely differently. what you do is you send up, and this is a standard visual working memory models. We have these, babies have these, animals have these. There's one symbol for you set up a mental model of the set that you're representing, and there's one symbol for each individual in the set. And so the representation of the set, the individuals in that stand in one-to-one correspondence to the set that's represented. And furthermore, computations are defined over these models. You can represent two at once. You can compare them on the basis of one-to-one correspondence, and therefore compute numerical equivalence. So there's numerical content here. There's a numerical content in the procedures that set up the models in the first place that have to be sensitive to numerical identity. Is the object you're seeing now the same one or a different one that you already have in your model? Do you need to open a new object file? There's no more numerical concept than numerical identity, but this is represented not with a symbol for numerical identity, but simply with computations that use it to set up the models such that the models stand in one-to-one correspondence, such that computations based on one-to-one correspondence actually something about numerical equivalence. So it's shot through with numerical content. There isn't a symbol for number any place in that, right? There's symbol for objects. That's what the explicit symbols are. So not only do we worry about the format of these symbols and what computations they support, but this also says that sometimes the content is determined implicitly by the computational role and is not explicitly represented. Okay, so with those distinctions in mind, how's logic represented in non-linguistic creatures? One last sort of throat-clearing thing. If we adopt a representational computational theory of mind, it's vanishingly unlikely that the machinery of mental computation does not include AND gates, OR gates, negation functions of various sorts, set representations functions. I mean, no computational model that doesn't have those properties is even a candidate for what's needed to underlie any computations that happen in the mind. So why isn't our work done? Because the question isn't, does our computational machinery have to implement all of that stuff? The question is whether symbols for these logical functions are available to articulate animal and language thought, productively combining with any symbol available for thought, right? So this requires that we distinguish within module computations from if you go back to Rich Ivory's talk, you want to distinguish the kinds of computations the cerebellum is doing from the kind of computations that the other error signal that the people were explicitly aware of and could articulate were doing, right? So I owe you, in the course of developing this work, ways of distinguishing what counts as thought and what counts as perception, sensory motor representations, et cetera. Now, it may turn out that there's no computational difference between these two. That's what we're actually looking for. But at least we need a place to start about how to divide the two. And so here's the first way to start it, and you'll see how it plays out in the experiments I'm going to say. The thoughts are person level. They're the representations that enter into the sort of last stage working memory models that determine the choices, actions, inferences that the person is making or the animal is making. They're very, thought is Fodor's central, domain general, talks to, interacts freely with other aspects of thought. One way it's operationalized in the animal literature is that the representations on the cognition side of perception and cognition can learn arbitrary rules in a domain general way. Okay, so how do you, if you have an analysis of some property that would be on the thought side of a divide, if there is a joint in nature, that's part what the issues are here, how would you ever find out whether non-linguistic representations have that property in question? That's one reason this topic hasn't been studied much. It's not, you'll see, it's not easy to do that. So the research strategy has to be, you find some aspect of mental representations that would be clearly on the thought side if there is a thought side of a divide, okay? And then you come up with case studies of that would such that success in some behavior you see would seem to require representations of those properties. So the case study we chose was logical connectives. Why? Well, if there's anything that's on the Fodorian side of language like logical, it's not going to be concepts of objects. It's not, I mean, it could be, it will be. They are, of course, they articulate propositional representations. But logical connectives have to. They can't be iconic or analog in format. They combine freely with anything that you can represent. So you know, you can replace arguments or variables with X. They support deductive inference. So can we find evidence for logical connectives articulating the thought of non-human animals or babies? That's the question. So the research strategy is you find a face-valid task, and I'm going to go through two, because it's important to look for domain generality, right? Because that's one of the signature properties of this. To look for logical connectives, we decided to start with the disjunctive syllogism, because there's actually a large animal literature purporting to show that animals can work through a disjunctive syllogism. So the disjunctive syllogism is A or B, not A, therefore B. That requires or not, and requires that these combine by the rules of propositional logic. That's why it's a good case study on its face. Now, if you find patterns of success and failure, then your work just starts. Because if the animals or the babies fail, it's always possible they're failing for performance, irrelevant performance demands of the task. The task is too hard, it masks a competence that they have. But also, if they succeed, it's always possible that they're succeeding on the basis of representations that are different than the ones that you're probing for. That's just how science works, right? And so, but once you convince yourself that you really are getting at the content you wanted, then you're in the position to then start describing the systems, like in the analog magnitude system and in parallel individuation for number. So after you've ruled out deflationary alternatives for successes and failures, you want to do work that constrain the models of the format and conceptual role by exploring distinctive signatures of different formats and conceptual roles. So that's just how the work has to go. Okay, so what's the first task? The first task, this was in the literature already, with both babies and animals, mutual exclusivity, referent disambiguation. I look at that and I say to you, look at the DAX. Where's the DAX? And what adults do is point to the vacuum tube. And why is this a face-valid task for the disjunctive syllogism? Well, it looks like you're saying, one of those two has to be the DAX. Can't be the cup, because that's a cup. Now, the way, whatever leads to the crossing out that option, it could be a pragmatic inference, or it could be a hardwired word learning constraint. It doesn't matter as far as the form of the inference. So A or B, not A, therefore B. So that's why it's on its face, it seems to be perhaps working through a disjunctive syllogism. So when can babies do this? This is work by Justin Halberta in his thesis when he was in my lab. So he just did a simple preferential looking. He showed them those two. He said, look at the DAC. Look at the cup. For the first things on some trials, look at the cup. Look at the cup. And when you say look at the cup, what you're plotting here is you have a baseline preference for the cup and the dax when they're just looking at it. And then upon hearing, look at the cup, do they increase their looking towards the cup? So this is the proportion of looking to the cup normalized by the baseline preference of looking. And you see from 14 months to 18 months, they increase their looking at the cup when you say look at the cup. The question is, what do they say when you say, where's the dax? Look at the dax. And what you find is that 17 and 18-month-olds are like adults, they look at the dax, but 14 and 15-month-olds increase their looking at the cup. So they fail. And 15, 16-month-olds are a chance. Okay, so this is showing an early success. In fact, this is the earliest success with this kind of paradigm. This has been replicated many times since then, is about 17 or 18 months. So this raises the possibility that there's some developmental change that makes working through a disjunctive syllogism become available around 17 or 18 months. But there's leaner interpretations of success here, okay? This could be domain-specific within word learning, right? That's why we want to look at tasks across different domains. But it's also that the strategy here might be something like map novel word to novel object. There's never any they're never considering it might be A or B. They're never crossing out an option. They're just looking for a novel object to map to that novel word, right? That's an alternative to the disjunctive syllogism, and many people think that that's what's happening at these ages. So there's signatures that you can distinguish between working through a disjunctive syllogism or mapping novel to novel. And one of them is just looking at the pattern of eye movements. When you hear, look at the dax. If you happen to be looking at the dax when you hear, look at the dax, and you're just mapping novel to novel, you should be done. You should just stay looking at the dax. But if you're actually working through a disjunctive syllogism, your eyes might reflect the fact that your attention has gone back to the cup to reject the cup before you go back to the object. That latter pattern is what is seen between roughly late 2-year-olds through adults. You see exactly that pattern of double check in the eye movements when you're deciding what the dax is. 17-month-olds just stay on the dax. They don't show that pattern of double ticks. Now, this experiment wasn't designed to test for that, and if you really wanted to advance this, you would want to do that work systematically to really try to test for it. But there's another signature, which is the one that's going to be more important in this work. You want to see some evidence that they've actually made the inference. They finished the inference here. And the way to do that is to test whether they learned the words, right? And so border collies and infants do what I've just told you already. But the question is, then suppose you've taught them that the vacuum tube is a dax and I don't know, an apple core is a blicket. You then show them the dax and the blicket and you say, which was the blicket? Okay. So did they actually learn the words? Did they follow through and map this new word to the thing, to the thing that they increased their attention to? And you have to, of course, control for the fact that they had to learn 2 words and remember that, but there's no problem for children doing that if you just tell them the words and it's not the result of an inference. So they can do that perfectly well. The answer is they don't learn the words until they're 3, and border collies don't learn the words. So there's no evidence that they're actually worked through the whole inference here, okay? Okay, so that's the state of affairs with the disjunctive syllogism so far. So what we wanted to do is say, okay, this could all be something internal to the module of word learning. Can we look at other tasks with this structure, with the same structure? And so we did one that's from the animal literature. It's the Joseph Call search task. He did it originally with 4 species of primates. And I love the animal cognition literature because when something interesting happens, then in the next 5 years, 40 more species are tested on exactly the same thing. And the finding is over wide ranges of mammals, birds, and primates, at least the majority of individuals tested spontaneously work through the inference that gives you face valid evidence for the disjunctive syllogism, but not all species. And so then that's an interesting question about what the different ecology is, such that this reasoning strategy might be available to this kind of lemur and not this kind of lemur. So here's the task. I'll just show you the infant version of it because it's so simple.
Yeah, and I can hold you. Yeah, Mom has to hold on. I know, this is less exciting.
Oh, are you ready? Hey, look where it's going. Okay, Eamon, look at this. And look at this. All right, where's the ball? Can you find the ball?
This is a failure, by the way.
Where's the ball?
A or B, not A. He looked at not A.
There it is.
Okay, so the ball's in A or B, you show them it's not in A. Of course, you counterbalance which bucket you manipulate first, whether it's the one that has it doesn't have, side, et cetera. You ask whether the child spontaneously, on learning it's not A, goes to B. The findings are 15-month-olds utterly fail, and 17-month-olds succeed wildly better than chance. And I mean, these are noisy data. There's no learning effect, right? They're just as good at the early trials as the late trials. Okay, notice this is the same developmental pattern as I just showed you in reference disambiguation. Right? The information processing demands on this task, the basis of the inference are entirely different, but yet you're seeing the same developmental pattern. Okay, here is, but if you want to claim that something about the disjunctive syllogism is emerging around 17 months, you want to make sure that there's not a deflationary alternative of the failures at 15 months. So this is a complicated task. The child has to remember that there's a ball, and then they have to also keep track of this very complicated and distracting thing where she draws their attention to each bucket. One of them she manipulates and the other one she shows it's empty because she doesn't want them to go to one just because she's manipulated just one. And they have to keep the goal in mind, and maybe they don't care that much about the ball. So you want to control for all those low-level sources of failure. So here's a simple way of doing that. Just take the inference out of it, but keep everything else the same. So, oops. So notice that she divides her hand at the top,
Okay, you
so
ready?
they can see where the thing
Where
is
it's
going.
going. Okay, look at this. And look at this. Where's the dog? Can you find the dog?
Mm-hmm.
You found it again.
And so now what you find is 15-month-olds succeed perfectly well. So they only fail when they have to arrive at that information from an inference. But otherwise, they're motivated to find the ball. They understand the task. They're not massively just thrown off by all that intervening stuff. Okay, here's the third face valid task. In the causal learning literature, there's a type of task called, a type of inference called indirect screening off, which is simply the disjunctive syllogism within causal reasoning. So this is a task as studied with children, and now the children literature has been taken to the animal literature, where there is a box, and you can place objects on the box, and some of those objects will turn the box on, and others don't. right? And the ones that turn it on are blickets. Some of these blocks are blickets and some are not. And so in a no inference trial, first you just show the child, this one does, this one doesn't. You get the child to make turn the box, make the box go, and this is, the kids love doing this. And then you have a no inference trials with two objects. So you show them the green one does, the red one doesn't, and then you say, can you make it go? And the question is, can they remember which one did and didn't, and inhibit the choice to put on the last thing they saw on it. So those are the baseline control trials to show that they understand the task and are motivated to do it. Then the exclusion trials, you show them ambiguous information. So the yellow one and the purple one together make it go. Show them that a couple times. Then you show them one of them doesn't and give them the choice. So A or B, not A, therefore B. Okay? And we did this with 15 and 17-month-olds, chosen because of the last two experiments. Both groups are above, this is very hard. This is the youngest success with blicket detector task in kids that I know of. So this is really hard, but both the 15 and 17-month-olds are above chance on the no inference trials, and now we have the familiar chance at the ones that supposed to do the disjunctive syllogism at 15 months, and better than chance, the same as in the no inference trials at 17 months. Okay, so there's a domain general change here, unless this is a massive coincidence, which it could be, of course, over referent disambiguation, search task, and causal inference. And so what's entirely open, although I'm going to try to show you some progress on deciding between this, is, first of all, if this isn't a coincidence, and if the domain general change has something to do with the disjunctive syllogism, how is negation, or for that matter, implemented in successful performance on these tasks from 17 months on? Because that's the candidate location of where the developmental change would be. Are the changes observed changes in the relevant reasoning abilities involving negation, computations involving negation? Or is the change a change in information processing capacity, allowing the demonstration of representational computational capacities in these tasks? That's still a deflationary account on these failures with respect to, still an interesting account. It would be something about executive function or something like that. But it wouldn't make these tasks be the tasks that you would want to ask my question. So how is negation implemented in successful performance in 17-month-olds? There may be a domain general symbol for negation in the language of thought, not. And conceptual combination, not X, not in the bucket, not the blicket, not the cup. And that may be coming available. But there's quite a different way of doing it, where the negation is implemented in a procedure, not in a symbol. So there might be a domain general option elimination procedure, which works something like this. Represent the alternatives in working memory, eliminate on the basis of domain-specific concepts, like empty or inert. Keep track of which ones have been eliminated, because that's absolutely necessary for it to implement this function of negation. But there's no symbol for negation involved in here. Okay. There's a lot of evidence that not X, there's a little bit of evidence, a tiny bit of evidence, that not X is not available to articulate thought in babies under 15 months. Because I'm going to tell you about 3 series of studies where people have tried to teach babies to learn arbitrary rules of the form not X predicts Y. One of them is in the context of representations of abstract relations. And so just the finding, but I'd show how it implements that, but then I'll show you how this works, is that 7 to 12-month-olds learn the rule same predicts the puppet appears on the left. In the face of failing to learn the rule, not same predicts puppets appears on the right. Okay? So You need the positive finding for the negative finding to be interested. So here's the paradigm. The baby's looking at 2 windows there, and then either in that central place, 2 icons appear successively, and they're either identical, a blue circle followed by a blue circle, or a triangle by a triangle, or they're different. If they're same, the thing appears on the left. If they're different, the thing appears on the right. Can they learn these rules? And the answer is, after about 24 trials of watching that, they start anticipating before the thing happens. So that shows they've learned the rules. So then you have a series of test trials where nothing appears, so you get more anticipatory behavior. And what you find, this is the proportion of correct anticipations, and this can be done with first fixations or total fixation time, same patterns of results. The percent or number correct minus incorrect over the total amount of anticipations. You see very, very robust success for the same rule, and they're at chance at the different rule. Now this is actually quite striking, because it's not like they're discriminating not same or different from same. They just didn't learn a rule, always look left or wherever same predicted. But all they would have to do if they've learned the rule same predicts left is the converse of that, and not same. It contrasts with it in the experiment, predicts right, and they don't. It's a chance. Okay. So we then went on and looked at slightly older babies and learning the rules same shape and same color, same design. Of course, the test trials are completely novel instantiations of these relations. And the same pattern. They learn same shape predicts whatever, and they're at chance with different shape or not same shape. And same thing for same color. Okay. Benitez, Varela, and Mailer used the same paradigm. Now forget don't pay attention. It's nothing to do with same, different anymore. When you're looking at these, there's nothing on the screen besides those two things. But you either hear soma, fa, va, vi, fi, a big long string of nonsense syllables, and that predicts left, and then 12 other long strings of nonsense syllables all predict right. So you could learn this if you learn soma, ve, sotuma, ve, fi predicts left, and nubi, ka, fo, we predicts right, and 11 others. You just learn the first one predicts left, and not that predicts the other. And what you get is you learn the rule, so, tu, ma, fe, fi predicts left, and you're at chance on the others. Again, you're differentiating them, and you don't learn not X in that context. And a third finding is that Roman Feynman and Fiery Cushman and I, I didn't put the date on, tested whether children could learn the rule with the content the agent reaches for the ball when provided a choice between a ball and a bunch of other things, and not learn the rule agent reaches for anything that's not the ball. Okay? So again, you can see this, we're looking for the same thing. So here they don't have to learn 2 rules, it's just 1 rule. This is between conditions. So what you do is, in the case where it's the affirmative condition, the agent is reaching for the ball, the agent reaches for the ball, then you take the ball, take it off this way, you've got another object there, you move the whole thing this way, now it's the ball and something else, and you replace that object there, so you can shuttle it back and forth. That's how you do this. But what the child sees, reaching for the ball, no matter what, ball over A, B, C, D, E, F, G, till the baby gets bored. Then you give them a new pair, and the question is, do they continue to expect that the baby will that the agent will reach for the ball and not the not ball? That's got to work for the other one to be interesting. And the other condition, the negation condition, is the baby reaches for anything but the ball, not the ball, doesn't want the ball. Negation in there. So they reach for A instead of the ball, B instead of the ball, C instead of the ball. And after they've got bored with that, do they expect that when you see a new pair that they will reach for the non-ball? And the answer is, I didn't put the slide in, 7 and 14 months do the affirmative one perfectly fine, and they're completely at chance. They have no expectation in the negative one. Whereas adults looking at those habituation movies and just asked to describe what happened say, he really doesn't like the ball. He didn't want the ball. He wants anything but the ball. I mean, it's just totally obvious. Okay, so this is certainly consistent with the view that babies under 15 months, all of these experiments are children under 15 months, don't have a symbol in the language of thought that's a negative operator that can combine freely with all of these other predicates, right? And what might be changing at 17 months is that becomes available, or the capacity to do that combination and hold that computation in working memory is becoming available at that age. However, there's reasons to doubt that even that's what 17 months old are doing. Mel, how much time do I still have? Okay, so I'm not going to tell you this, but so I misjudged this. Basically, the next strategy that we had was to ask, when do English learners analyze no and not as truth functional operators? That is, when do they learn the meanings of the words? No comes into their vocabulary when they're 12. Anybody who has a baby knows that no comes into the vocabulary very early. But it's used for denial, right? It's not used, I mean, it's used for refusal. Do you want a bath? No. Do you want peas? No. But you don't see in production babies producing negation to invert the truth value of a proposition until about 27 months of age. But that's production. So we looked at comprehension, and that's true of comprehension as well. They don't comprehend either no or not as truth functional connectives in language until after about almost a year and a half of having at least the word for no in their vocabulary. And that's what you would expect if there isn't a symbol around in the language of thought available to map that onto, okay? So I think, so these are the experiments that show that. They're very similar, they use the same. So I doubt that the top one is where the developmental change is. I think that what's probably underlying success here is an optional elimination procedure, which may actually implement one function of negation. But there's reasons to doubt even that. There's a leaner interpretation. So on this optional elimination procedure, you have to set up the options. If it's a disjunctive syllogism, you have to represent the logical relation between the options, such that when you eliminate one option, you have a deductive certainty that it's B. If you've adopted those premises and you've worked through that syllogism, then it's got to be B. But there's other possibilities. You could be representing the alternatives, especially because they're given visually. But you just think, okay, there's some, it could be here, it could be there, maybe A, maybe B, maybe even 50-50 probability. When you eliminate the option, you don't update the probability at all. It's still just maybe there, but that's where you would look then because it's maybe there, right? That's not the disjunctive syllogism. And also even a leaner interpretation is you're not representing the possibilities at all, you're just avoiding an empty container or an inert block in the context of the search task or the, okay. So how could you test that the minimal requirement for deductive certainty that they're updating the probability upon learning not A? make there be two disjuncts, okay? So you hide one in these buckets, one sticker in these cups, one sticker in those cups, and then when you reveal it, you have, there's 50-50 probability in the green and the orange ones, there's 50-50 in blue and yellow. Now when you show them one is empty, if you've worked through the disjunctive syllogism, this is the pattern that you should expect. And so if you work through the disjunctive syllogism, you better go to the red one. If you're just eliminating an option and now looking at the remaining possibilities, you might go 33%, 33%, 33%. So this enables you to decide, to test the very minimal. I don't know how to know that they've updated the possibility to 100%, but I can tell you whether they're updating the probability on the basis of this at all. Now you need a control trial that shows that the children understand, and a training trial, understand the structure of this task. So can they decide between a 50-50 and 100% if you don't have to arrive that by inference? So here you just hide one between the two and one in one, and then you ask them, and they know that they get to keep the sticker if they get it on their first try. So are they motivated to get it on their first try? Do they care about the stickers? Do they know how to go for certainty when there's no inference involved getting that certainty? And the answer is, yeah, this is hard this is 2 to 5-year-olds. This is hard for them. But they're all better than chance on the control trials. Now, what about these crucial test trials? Okay. The 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds, their performance is indistinguishable from the control trials. So this is a hard task, but there's no cost to getting to the certainty from the inference from 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. The 2-year-olds choose 33%, 33%, 33%, okay? And then I don't have time to show you. We did the same thing in the Blicket detector task. So now we have 2 sets of ambiguous trials. So we have, this is demonstrating this experiment. This is the slide I just showed you. We show them that one between the yellow one and the purple one is a Blicket, and then we have another pair, say a pink one and a gray one, and one of those is a Blicket. Then we show them one of those is not, and so now we're in the same situation of 100, 0, 50, 50. When they are asked to make it go, do they pick the sure bet? Okay, the warm-up trials just teach them to put Blickets on the you demonstrate the Blicket makes it go, you ask them to do it, they all do it. The baseline trials are the no inference trials from before, and now here are the test trials with 2 pairs. The 2.5-year-olds, 33%, 33%, 33%, 3 and 4-year-olds better than chance. Okay. So this is the same developmental pattern on 3 face-valid tasks of the disjunctive syllogism. Failure altogether between 15 months, success at 17 months, but failure to show a probe signature of deductive reasoning, right? The signatures of deductive reasoning by age 3 across all 3 of those tasks. Okay, this could still be massive coincidence, but I'm beginning to think it's not. So what's changing between 17 months and 3-year-olds on the bucket choice and Blicket task? They have linguistic not by 26 to 28 months, but they still fail to show, in the truth functional sense, but they still fail to show the signatures of disjunctive syllogism. So I don't think they're setting up the A or B premise. Why? Well, maybe you need linguistic or to do it. Childe's analyses of production shows that children produce and by roughly 24 months. But or is not seen in production till 3. Conclusions. There's no evidence for a prelinguistic disjunctive syllogism. The animal literature which is taken to show evidence that animals have propositional logic is this disjunctive syllogism task, but it's just the two bucket version that 17-month-olds are succeeding. And as I say, I think that even that, the logical content, if it's the optional elimination procedure, is implicit in the same sense, parallel individuation and number. And it may not even be that, because there's no evidence that they're actually updating the probability in B upon learning not A. And these controls haven't been done in the animals, but I'd be really surprised if the animals are better than the babies. So the final conclusions are, this is very early days in this research program, but the evidence, this is not what I expected. I thought it would be easy. I thought Fodor was right? I thought it would be easy to show evidence that the cognition of non-human animals and babies, certainly, because they're going to learn language, have the properties of a Fodorian language of thought. But this evidence is consistent with the absence of pre-linguistic symbols of logical connectives, one important component, but not the only one, of a Fodorian language of thought in infancy, not fully explored in animals. These data are consistent with the possibility that propositional representations with language-like format, such as logical connectives, arise in ontogenesis only upon mastering their natural language expressions. This could change tomorrow if I get a different task that's a face-valid task that but this is, we've really gone at this, in many different ways here and found these systematic failures to represent not X at all as the input to an arbitrary rule in kids under 15 months, and we don't know in the older age, and probing for the signature of deductive certainty and failing to find it across the way. So that's the argument I'm making today. Thank you.
Oh, we certainly have time for questions. Sandy.
We have someone who doesn't really count as in the back.
Take the back person first.
No, the back is Rich Ivory.
That was a beautiful tour de force. And I'm surprised, too, that they don't have the...
Well, at least we can't
that we haven't shown
it
it earlier.
Yeah.
But the question is, in your final conclusion, could you just expand a little and tell us how they could learn, if the missing link is to learn the natural language expression for logical not or, how do they learn it if they don't have the requisite concept in the first place on the view?
Yeah, so that's what bootstrapping models are, right? And so the idea would be there has to be innate support for this, and there's no doubt. So these children, at the age at which they're not doing this, they clearly have propositional representations. These are 2.5-year-olds. They know most of English, right? So they have the argument structure and the semantic combinatorial rules and the syntactic combinatorial rules to represent propositions, no doubt about that. But it may well be that you need that the innate support for learning logical connectives have to operate on those, right? So the idea is that part of the language acquisition device has to be the content needed for the expression of quantifiers in language, the expressor, the semantics underlying logical connectives. I mean, they just structure all languages, right? So it's there, but it's part of the language acquisition device, right? And it's only defined relative to propositions as represent. So one thing in the data that I didn't show you, which was the language learning part, it was just the same task. You hid something in either a bucket or a truck, but now instead of showing them it's empty, you just tell them it's not in the bucket, right? And what you find is that 2-year-olds just ignore the not and they look in the bucket equally, whether you say it's in the bucket or it's not in the bucket. And these kids are not producing not yet, and they're not producing, in their speech, they're not producing propositional negations. And it's not until 27 months when they are producing it, they use that for not. But that's not. So we also did the same thing for no, and it's the same thing. No has been in their vocabulary forever, but now the question, the mother says, is it in the bucket? And the experimenter says, no, it isn't, or yes, it is. And the 2-year-olds ignore the no and look in the bucket if in both of those cases, and it's not till 27 months that they get it right. But they need to know, they do just barely better than chance on the affirmatives at 20 months. They're better than chance, and they don't distinguish the two, the affirmatives and the negatives. So the representation of the positive propositions are changing over this time as well. So it's not a magical, I don't think it's a bootstrapping story like in the history of science or number, right? I think that there is innate support for this, but the innate support is in the constraints on the semantics of propositional representations within language. Yeah, they need the language. They need you can't even entertain the possibility that no is a function word that inverts the truth value of a proposition if you can't represent the proposition on the fly, because you wouldn't get the evidence to do that, right? So this says it's internal to the language acquisition device. That's what the constraint on learning these words are. But what's left open by these data is that until that happens, you don't have a symbol for those functions in the language of thought. Right? That could be true. It's a language learning problem, and it's just a mapping problem. You already had it, and that just explains what's hard about the mapping. So we have experiments trying to tease out those two possibilities as well.
You say that it's something that develops as within language, but you have no evidence for that. That you believe, right? So
the evidence is only that there is a close relation between the performance on the non-linguistic tasks and when they learn the words for these. But that causation could be going in either direction.
Exactly.
But we have a research program in collaboration with Agnes Kovacs and a graduate student of hers named Esther Szabo, and Roman Feynman, who's the person who's all over this work, looking at cross-linguistic comparisons between Hungarian and English. And there's a variety of reasons that are too complicated to mention that Hungarian might be expected to have an easier language learning problem for kids. And indeed, the children learn the Hungarian expressions of negation 4 to 6 months earlier than English do.
Right.
So it's no doubt that part of the problem is just internal to learning language. But now the question becomes, does that, it's certainly not the case that the success at 27 months in English learners has to await a language learning independent conceptual change that's maturing or learned by some other mechanism, because then the Hungarian kids shouldn't have it, right? But we don't know that learning in Hungarian is making something available to non-linguistic thought. Yeah, so that's where we're going.
So even so this leads me to the question I want to ask. So Piaget went out of fashion some time ago. Are you reviving him?
I've always absolutely. Look.
So let me finish my comment. So is then really perhaps, I don't know how to do this, but to seek back in this notion of abstraction réfléchissante, a kind of principle that explains how these things may come about, but that this notion that he attributed to 7 years is really a general principle that works all the way back. And so
Well, this
different-
particular, this is the essence of his transition to formal operational thought. So I'm not reviving Piaget in that way. That's totally ridiculous, right? Because Piaget never looked at the structure of language. And the logical connections of language, the natural semantics has all of the signature properties of a Fodorian language of thought. Yeah. Yes. So people see me as a radical nativist, and that's because I am, in the sense that I think there's massive innate representational machinery available. You'd never learn anything if it wasn't, and it's an empirical question how rich its content is and what computational properties are. I think that those questions can be asked and answered, but I'm also a discontinuity theorist. I was always a Piagetian in that sense, but all of the work before has been within specific domains. So conceptual changes within intuitive theories in which actually new primitives are coined, right? So I have always been interested in discontinuities in development. And this is not an area where I thought, and I still don't know that I should think, right? This is not an area where I thought this would play out this way. But we have a second case study on abstract relations, which is what the same different part was actually part of. It's coming out exactly the same way. So I'll be forced. I don't think there's anything logically incoherent about it. So there are learning mechanisms that can actually affect these changes, and these are the bootstrapping processes. I don't think this is that kind of bootstrapping, but it still could be a representational change where you have to gain access to these explicit representations within language first before you can use them in thought more generally. That's, I think, not an incoherent position, and it might be true. And then that would be a real discontinuity, because whatever logical content is available to the representational and computational system in non-human animals and in pre-verbal infants, it would either be implicit, or explicitly represented, like in the analog magnitude system, but in a way very different from the way it is in language, such that it wouldn't even combine with a negative operator, even if you had one, right? And so we can go to work and explore between those two possibilities. So I'm just open to that possibility. I don't think, I made the argument today that we should take those possibilities seriously. I don't seriously think by any means that I've shown, this is, as I said, really early days of how you start on such a research program.
There's a question down there.
Okay, better? Okay. It wasn't entirely clear to me if it's a difficulty with negation or a difficulty in updating the probabilities of something based on what you learn about something else. So I think you'd have to do some sort of and. What if you show this happens to object A means that that happens to object B?
Well,
do you try that?
The reason we haven't done and is that and is just everywhere. Every time you open, suppose you're setting up an object file representation in working memory. So I show you this cup and I put it behind the screen. Then I show you this cup. And because it's spatially temporally distinct from this, it is a different cup. So I put it down here. And now you expect two. Okay, you've done an and there. You've got to set up this model of two, you had one and you added a second. But there's no symbol for and there. I don't even know how to begin looking for a symbol for and in non-linguistic thought, because all the very concatenations that you do implement and. So I agree with you that the problem might be updating probabilities, but animals and babies update probabilities all the time, right?
Yeah, but about different things.
Yes,
So
of course.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you're completely right. But the question is, why aren't they updating the probability? Why aren't they updating the probability in this case? So what we're doing now is actually, we're actually trying to make progress on just this question by seeing whether toddlers at the age at which they're failing at this at least are sensitive to the probabilities in risky choice decisions. So what if you have a choice between a sure bet and a choice of 4, where it's one of those 4? Is that different from when there's a choice of 8 or a choice of 2? Are they sensitive to those probabilities? In a way, we already showed that in the control task, where there's a choice between 2 and a choice of 1. But we're not convinced that that's the basis on which they actually did that task. So maybe the control task doesn't show that they have that capacity at least to even represent the probabilities and be sensitive to them in making a choice. So we're doing that. And then if we can look at their capacity to update them when it doesn't require an inference, right? So yes, I agree that that's something we need to do.
One up here, and then Rich Ivory at the back. This one, then back.
Hi, hello. So I would like if you want to tell us more about the first part of the story that you told us today, the part of the transition between the age of 15 and 17. Mm-hmm. And what are your view about that? Because you have this consistent pattern of results in a series of tasks in which I think that there is evidence that non-human animal species succeed in this type of task with the bucket task, this causal learning by exclusion inferences, as well in some kind of form of novelty to novelty mapping. And I'm curious why do you think that? What is your view about the failure of the younger infants?
That's a very good question. So it could be that what's changing between 15 and 17 months is building the right form of an option elimination procedure, even the maybe A, maybe B version of it. You need to tag those options when you've eliminated. So look, every time you do a choice, suppose you're an animal or a baby and you're searching for something. So you're searching for a ball somewhere on this table. So you look here, okay? It's not there. Okay, you then go search someplace else, right? But if you haven't explicitly set up a space of alternatives and tag this one as eliminated, then this procedure you could randomly search back to that, right? And so the question is, when do they actually set up a delimited set of options and keep track of the ones they've crossed out? And maybe that procedure is still getting compiled or something at this age and becomes available in this domain general way, because that's what all of these tasks were at that age. But the other possibility is, no. That's not a problem. I mean, the problem is executive function, working memory is changing incredibly over these ages. And so maybe what's changing here are the working memory capacities that allow you to actually implement these procedures and these tasks. And we chose tasks that really made on their surface really different working memory demands. But they all require a kind of inhibition as well, because you have to inhibit attention to the one that I just showed you. It's not X. And we've ruled out that that's the source of the problem. So that was something we actually designed experiments to our control experiments and the way we counterbalance things show that that's not the problem. But the updating working memory could be what's developing here, and then it would be continuous with the animals that option elimination procedure is available in a domain general way in infancy, and it does implement a genuine form of function of negation, but it doesn't allow you to think thoughts like, if not A, then B, or even not A predicts left, or not A predicts. So it's not the form of negation that we need for a Fodorian language of thought, even though it is a genuine form of, just like parallel individuation has genuine numerical content. So I think that might be the right story, and it makes sense of the fact that these are adult animals. So I think that might be right for the developmental case. But here's a little hint. We can't take this result home to the bank yet, but the Hungarian children who learn the linguistic expression of negation 4 to 6 months earlier than English children succeed on the non-linguistic 2-bucket task at 15 months. So this suggests that actually that there might be some change internal to representation of negation involved. I mean, we have that result. They're statistically better than chance, but they aren't statistically different from the English kids in the one experiment we've done yet. So I don't know that that's true, but you could see what we're going after there. To say that it might not only be a development of the executive function. What?
There are very few of us left. So I know it's early days here, but you set out sort of the question was, does the language of thought sort of serve as this precursor, right, for conceptual development in language? And the question is, suppose that, the end result is that we can dispense with that as sort of serving this purpose, then is there a place for keeping the idea of language of thought in the adult mind? Should we dispense with that too? What would be the status for that sort of concept in the adult mind?
The reason for that is the non-linguistic representations that you need to support the meanings, the combinatorial properties of English, right? I mean, we think often in English. So the language of thought may be English. That's why it has the properties of a natural language.
That's the
but
question,
it's still
right?
a language of thought, right?
Well, no, because then it's not, right, the whole language of thought notion is that it's obeying the properties of a language, but not really the language, right? It's
No,
not.
I agree. I completely agree. This, an extreme version of the way I presented it today is consistent with the view that the Fodorian of language of thought simply is language, in which case it doesn't do the work. In which case the story comes down on the Davidson Descartes side.
That's right. So you could do the thought experiment of take an adult, and if you had some magical tool to disconnect the language system, they'd also fail on your...
We already know that that's not right, okay? We know that the language of thought scaffolds, language learning scaffolds, for example, being able to do explicit theory of mind tasks, and also number tasks. to learn arithmetic. But once it's learned, deep aphasics can still do them. So you end up with a representational system that doesn't require language as a medium to be implemented in any given task. So I don't go all the way that you have to think in English in order to think this way. But it may well be that you don't get the representational structures that enable you to think this way until you've mastered them in English.
Well, we have 2 more questions, and then it's the bus.
Is it time for the bus already? No.
So I'm dying to hear about the difference in Hungarian, and I know that you don't have time to do that. So I'm looking forward to the banquet tonight to hear that, because it's going to be a crucial piece of the evidence. But in advance of having that, or even if I said to you, I don't believe it for a minute, the Hungarian language, whatever, shouldn't have the negation, or shouldn't have not earlier. That raises the question, couldn't you do some individual analyses?
Yes.
So you should be able to make individual
Absolutely.
different...
So that's the other next line of experiments to do. This work calls out for individual difference studies. So you can look
or you
at,
hold constant other
or
capacities.
also priming studies. If there's really something in common across these things, if you've got kids doing negation in the bucket task, does it help them on the blicket task, right? Or at least there's a lot of variance in those 17-month-olds. They're just slightly better in the chance. Lots of them are like 15-month-olds. A lot of them are like 19-month-olds who are much closer to ceiling. So are the ones that are bad at the blicket detector task also bad at either one? So that at least would give you stronger evidence for domain generality. But you could also then do individual differences tasks looking at measures of updating working memory, for example. The reasons we haven't done that is these studies require 24 babies, 24 toddlers at each age. It's still big studies as developmental studies go. Those individual difference studies, to be good, require 100. And so it's a big investment, and you wouldn't want to make that investment until you at least had this body of work. And so we might, if I can get a graduate student or a postdoc who want to do that.
Or bring these babies back knowing what they did, knowing what the babies did at 17 months. Bring them back N months later and have them do another task and see if there's some elevation.
No, it's just too close to chance.
Never mind. But I like the idea of going individuals.
Yeah.
Well, I think studying in Hungarian at the last question.
Thank you. I don't know, should be proud of this or maybe that's why Hungarian is supposed to be so hard to learn for other people. Anyway, these are exploratory questions instead of, we'll have time to about specific points, but you mentioned, but you did not elaborate the connection between this, acquiring the knot and connectives and truth functional understanding, understanding truth and truth functions, counterfactual reasoning, and maybe also propositions. So it's not immediately obvious why for propositional representations, which you need in order to combine them, okay. But why would you need for subject argument structure or several argument relational structures, like I give this to him? Why would you need negation?
You don't need negation, but you need negation. Negation is a function which, if it's true that I like cookies, then it's false that I don't like cookies, right? And so the point is, so there's two analyses. So to address the question you're coming back to the question I asked you at the end of your talk, to address the question of when in development or when in evolution there are true propositional representations in non-linguistic thought, you need an analysis of what counts as a true propositional relation. And there's two analyses in the philosophical literature. One is sentence internal. You have to be able to build trees and assign negation at various parts of the tree so that one function of negation is like not green. That's not anything that's not green. Okay, that tells you know how to you can make a verification procedure for that. And what it does is pick out the complement of the set of things that are green. And that is taken by some philosophers as a hallmark of propositional representations, is that you can do those kinds of operations. Negation isn't a privileged one, internal to the sentence, and there's very regular functions. So the hallmark of propositional representations is the nature of the relations internal to a proposition. Another is, the hallmark of propositional of logical connected propositional representations are just what you need for the truth tables of propositional calculus. And if that's so, negation is absolutely necessary, because that's the whole content of it, right? It's the whole content is the logic of the propositional calculus, which is what you can do over if, then, and, or, and not, period. That's just what propositional representations are, in which case you need them to have propositional representations. So, and I don't know what all I know is that there are these two analyses in the philosophical literature. I think it's amazing that philosophers would debate which is the right way to think about propositions. It seems to be, they're both good questions. But why? So you were assuming the former, in which case I then agree with you, that just the argument structure within the affirmatives already shows that you've got propositional representations, right? And you don't need negation for that, although you need that for negation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you.